Christopher Lee was known as one of Hollywood's greatest actors, but those who worked closely with him knew there was much more to his story. Now at 67, Viggo Mortensen has opened up about the moments they shared that convinced him the stories about Christopher Lee's extraordinary past were true. Join us as we uncover the remarkable truth behind the rumors that have followed Lee for decades. Viggo Mortensen was never meant to be Aragorn. Before Viggo Mortensen became one of the most recognizable faces in The Lord of the Rings, he had spent years building a career that almost no one noticed. His journey to becoming Aragorn was far from planned, and in many ways it happened because of a series of unexpected events rather than careful career decisions. Mortensen was born in New York City in 1958, but he did not spend much of his childhood there. His family moved often while he was very young, living in Venezuela, Denmark, and later Argentina. Argentina became especially important to him because he spent several years there and became fluent in Spanish. Growing up in different countries gave him a broad view of the world and exposed him to different cultures, languages, and traditions. Those experiences stayed with him throughout his life and later helped him connect with many different kinds of people. When Viggo was 11 years old, his parents divorced. He returned to New York with his mother and brothers, where he finished school and later graduated from St. Lawrence University in 1980. Like many young adults, he wasn't sure what he wanted to do next. He traveled through Europe, worked different jobs, and lived in places such as England, Spain, and Denmark. Acting was not part of his plan. His path changed almost by accident. After returning to New York, he believed he was auditioning for a stage production. Instead, he found himself at an acting school. Rather than walking away, he decided to give it a chance. That unexpected moment became the starting point of a career that would last decades. Mortensen's first film appearance came in 1985 with a small role in Witness, starring Harrison Ford. It was only a brief part, but it opened the door to more work. Throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, he appeared in dozens of films, many of which received little attention. He often played supporting characters or appeared in movies that were not major successes. Even so, directors noticed something different about him. No matter how small the role was, Mortensen approached every performance with complete dedication. He believed every character deserved the same level of effort. If a scene required him to be physically uncomfortable, he accepted it. If learning new skills made the role more believable, he put in the time. He never seemed interested in taking shortcuts. This reputation slowly spread throughout Hollywood. Filmmakers knew that if they hired Viggo Mortensen, they would get someone fully committed to the character. Audiences, however, still largely did not know his name. Then came The Lord of the Rings. Peter Jackson originally cast Irish actor Stuart Townsend as Aragorn. Townsend spent weeks preparing for the role, but problems appeared almost immediately. Reports from the production suggested that he resisted rehearsals and was unwilling to fully commit to horseback riding and sword training. Jackson eventually decided the role needed someone with a different attitude. Just 2 days after filming had begun, Townsend was dismissed. The production suddenly faced a major problem. Aragorn was one of the central characters in the entire trilogy, and filming was already underway. Several actors were discussed as replacements. Jason Patric was considered, while Russell Crowe reportedly chose not to take the part because he did not want to continue making historical or fantasy epics after Gladiator. That left Viggo Mortensen. At first, Mortensen was not excited by the offer. The role would require him to spend many months filming in New Zealand, far away from his young son, Henry. Family came first, and he was not eager to miss such an important part of his son's childhood. The decision might have ended there if Henry had not spoken up. Henry was already a fan of J.R.R. Tolkien's books and immediately understood how special the opportunity was. He encouraged his father to accept the role and reminded him that becoming Aragorn was something very few actors would ever get the chance to do. His excitement changed Mortensen's mind. With little time to prepare, Mortensen agreed and boarded a plane to New Zealand almost immediately. He arrived after filming had already started, without the weeks of rehearsal that most of the cast had enjoyed. He had to learn the role while cameras were already rolling, build relationships with his fellow actors on set, and step into one of the biggest productions ever made. Few people realized it then, but that last-minute decision would change not only Viggo Mortensen's career, but also the history of The Lord of the Rings itself. But once filming began, it didn't take long for everyone to realize they had found the perfect Aragorn. The commitment. When Viggo Mortensen arrived in New Zealand, he had almost no time to prepare. Most actors would have struggled after joining such a massive production in the middle of filming. Mortensen responded differently. He decided that if he were going to play Aragorn, he would give everything he had to the role from the very first day. At first, even Peter Jackson admitted that Mortensen was still finding his place. In Aragorn's earliest scenes, especially his introduction at the Prancing Pony, there was a quiet uncertainty in his performance. Looking back, many fans, and even Jackson himself, felt that this actually worked in the character's favor. Aragorn was supposed to be a man hiding from his destiny, unsure of whether he should accept the role that awaited him. Mortensen's own adjustment to the production gave those early scenes a natural honesty. It did not take long before everything changed. As filming continued, Mortensen completely immersed himself in the world of Middle-earth. He wasn't interested in simply memorizing his lines or following directions. He wanted every movement, every fight, and every moment to feel real. That attitude quickly became one of the things that separated him from many other actors. One of the clearest examples was his decision to train with a real steel sword instead of the lighter rubber or aluminum versions often used during rehearsals. A real sword was much heavier and required far greater control. It demanded strength, balance, and constant practice. Mortensen carried it with him so often that using it eventually became second nature. He even practiced away from the set whenever he could. His dedication impressed the film's fight choreographers. They praised his natural ability and the amount of work he put into mastering sword fighting. By the time the major battle scenes were filmed, Mortensen moved with the confidence of someone who had spent years training instead of only a few months. His commitment extended far beyond swordsmanship. Horse riding became another major part of Aragorn's character, so Mortensen devoted himself to becoming an excellent rider. Instead of treating the horses as props, he spent time getting to know them. He built genuine relationships with the animals, learning their personalities and earning their trust. Those connections became so meaningful that after filming ended, he actually bought the horse he rode during the trilogy. He also purchased another horse for one of Liv Tyler's stunt doubles after learning it might not receive proper care elsewhere. His respect for the horses reflected the way he approached every part of the production. Nothing was simply a job to him. Every detail mattered. That level of dedication sometimes came with painful consequences. One of the most famous moments happened during the filming of The Two Towers. In a scene where Aragorn believes Merry and Pippin have died, he kicks an orc helmet in frustration. The force of the kick broke two of Mortensen's toes. Instead of stopping immediately, the screen viewers hear in the finished film is his real reaction to the injury. Peter Jackson kept the take because the emotion was completely genuine. Another incident occurred during the filming of the Battle of Helm's Deep. Mortensen chipped one of his teeth. Rather than removing his costume and delaying production, he reportedly visited the dentist still dressed as Aragorn, complete with fake blood and battle makeup, so filming could continue as quickly as possible. Stories like these spread across the set. Everyone noticed that Mortensen never seemed interested in taking the easy option. He wasn't trying to prove how tough he was. He simply believed that staying committed to the role produced the best performance possible. Peter Jackson eventually found himself treating Mortensen almost as if he really were Aragorn. At one point, Jackson later joked that he spent a lengthy conversation addressing him as Aragorn before realizing he hadn't used the actor's real name once. That showed how completely Mortensen had disappeared into the character. The cast of The Lord of the Rings was already known for its hard work and dedication. Many actors trained for months, learned new physical skills, and pushed themselves through difficult filming conditions. Even among such a committed group, Mortensen's level of preparation stood out. It was exactly this attitude that caught Christopher Lee's attention. Lee had spent decades working in films and had seen countless actors come and go. He recognized immediately when someone was fully devoted to their craft. Mortensen's discipline, respect for history, love of learning, and refusal to fake authenticity reminded Lee of qualities he deeply admired. Before long, the two actors found themselves spending more and more time together between scenes, beginning a friendship built on shared interests that went far beyond making movies. What started as professional respect soon turned into one of the most fascinating friendships on the entire set, unlike anyone else. By the time Christopher Lee joined The Lord of the Rings, he was already a legend. Most people knew him as the actor who had played Dracula, Count Dooku, and many other unforgettable villains. But those who worked with him quickly discovered that his life before Hollywood was just as remarkable as anything he had ever done on screen. Unlike most actors, Lee arrived on set carrying experiences that stretched far beyond the film industry. He had lived through some of the biggest events of the 20th century, and many of those experiences shaped the calm, thoughtful man his younger co-stars came to admire. Christopher Lee was born in London in 1922. Long before he became an actor, the world was changing rapidly. When World War II broke out, Lee joined the Royal Air Force in 1941. During the war, he served as an intelligence officer and eventually reached the rank of flight lieutenant. His duties were serious, and they placed him in situations that very few people ever experience. Even decades later, Lee rarely spoke in detail about everything he did during the war. Friends and colleagues knew that parts of his service remained classified or were simply things he chose not to discuss. Whenever conversations moved towards certain military operations, Lee often stopped himself before saying too much. He preferred to keep those memories private. Over the years, stories circulated that Lee had worked alongside British special operations and intelligence units during the war. Some reports connected him to organizations linked to secret missions behind enemy lines. Lee never confirmed every rumor directly, but he also never completely denied that he had taken part in dangerous assignments. Instead, he usually smiled, gave a short answer, and changed the subject. That mystery became part of his reputation. Even people who had known him for years admitted they never learned the full story. Producer Barry Osborne later recalled that people on the production believed Lee had been involved with British intelligence or similar organizations, but even those working closely with him did not know every detail. Lee seemed perfectly comfortable leaving some questions unanswered. What everyone did know was that he possessed an incredible amount of knowledge. Lee spoke several languages, including English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, and others. Learning languages had always interested him, not because he needed them for acting, but because he genuinely enjoyed studying different cultures and histories. His conversations often moved easily from literature to military history, ancient civilizations, and European legends. History and mythology were lifelong passions for him. He didn't simply read about famous events or legendary stories. He studied them carefully and remembered what he learned. That made him especially well-suited for a film like The Lord of the Rings, which draws heavily from ancient myths, medieval history, and old European traditions. There was another reason Lee felt personally connected to Tolkien's world. He was the only member of Peter Jackson's cast who had actually met J.R.R. Tolkien himself. Years before the films were ever imagined, Lee had the opportunity to meet the famous author. It was a brief meeting, but it left a lasting impression on him. None of the younger actors could say they had spoken with the man who created Middle-earth. Lee could. His admiration for Tolkien never faded. In fact, he made it a personal tradition to reread The Lord of the Rings every single year. This wasn't something he did for publicity or because he expected to play a role in the films one day. It was simply a habit he maintained because he loved the books. So, when Peter Jackson began casting the trilogy, Lee already knew the story better than almost anyone else involved. His first choice, however, was not Saruman. Lee openly admitted that he had always dreamed of playing Gandalf. He believed it would have been an incredible role, and he never hid that fact in interviews. But by the time production began, he was approaching 80 years old. Gandalf required long days of riding horses, physically demanding fight scenes, and extensive outdoor filming. Lee understood that those demands would be difficult to meet. Rather than insist on his first choice, he accepted the role of Saruman. It was a practical decision and one he fully embraced. Once he committed, he poured all of his energy into bringing the fallen wizard to life. The younger cast members noticed something different about him almost immediately. Lee wasn't simply performing scenes from a script. He understood the history behind the characters, the language behind the dialogue, and the deeper ideas that inspired Tolkien's writing. When he spoke about Middle-earth, it often felt as though he were discussing real history rather than fiction. That was something no acting school could teach. Actors like Viggo Mortensen respected hard work, preparation, and realism, but Christopher Lee brought something even rarer. He carried decades of real-life experience, endless knowledge, and quiet confidence into every scene. Without trying to become the center of attention, he naturally became someone the younger actors looked up to. And among all those younger actors, one in particular would soon develop a friendship with Lee that neither of them ever forgot. Before long, Christopher Lee and Viggo Mortensen discovered they had far more in common than anyone expected. Two perfectionists. Although The Lord of the Rings featured a huge cast, not everyone spent their free time in the same way. Between scenes, many actors relaxed by joking around, playing games, or simply resting after long filming days. Viggo Mortensen and Christopher Lee often chose something different. They found quiet places to talk. Their friendship did not grow because they were playing important characters in the story. It grew because they discovered they shared many of the same interests away from the cameras. Both men enjoyed learning, reading, and exploring subjects that had nothing to do with Hollywood. Those conversations became one of the most meaningful parts of their time together in New Zealand. One thing that immediately connected them was language. Mortensen had grown up in several countries and spoke fluent Spanish after spending much of his childhood in Argentina. He also knew other European languages from his travels and years spent living overseas. Christopher Lee was equally gifted with languages. Over his lifetime, he learned several, including German, French, Italian, Spanish, and others. Instead of speaking only in English, the two actors sometimes switched between German and Spanish and even discussed ideas using words from Old Norse. These were not conversations they were having because the script required it. They genuinely enjoyed speaking different languages and appreciated the history behind them. For both men, learning a language meant understanding the people and traditions connected to it. Those discussions naturally led to other subjects they both loved. They talked about mythology, ancient legends, literature, medieval history, and European folklore. Since Tolkien had built Middle-earth using many of these traditions, both actors found endless topics to explore. They discussed the myths that inspired characters, the historical events reflected in Tolkien's writing, and the old stories that had shaped European culture for centuries. While many cast members viewed The Lord of the Rings as an exciting fantasy adventure, Mortensen and Lee appreciated the deeper ideas behind it. They understood that Tolkien had drawn inspiration from real languages, historical conflicts, and ancient legends. That shared understanding helped strengthen their friendship. Lee also admired the way Mortensen approached the physical side of acting. By the time filming was well underway, everyone on set had noticed Mortensen's commitment. He trained constantly with his heavy steel sword instead of lighter practice weapons. He practiced horseback riding whenever possible. He wanted every movement to feel natural rather than rehearsed. Christopher Lee paid close attention. Lee himself had spent decades performing sword fights in films. From his Hammer horror movies to historical adventures and fantasy productions, he had handled swords more times than almost any actor of his generation. He knew the difference between someone who simply memorized choreography and someone who truly understood how a weapon should move. Watching Mortensen train, Lee reportedly remarked that he had natural combat instincts. That was high praise coming from someone with Lee's experience. It wasn't a compliment he handed out freely. He respected the amount of work Mortensen had put into mastering the physical demands of Aragorn instead of relying on camera tricks or editing. Lee admired more than Mortensen's fighting skills. He appreciated his attitude. Many younger actors were eager to become stars, but Mortensen seemed focused only on doing the work well. Fame did not appear to interest him nearly as much as creating an honest performance. Lee had spent decades in the film industry and could recognize that difference immediately. Mortensen's humility, curiosity, and willingness to keep learning reminded Lee of qualities that mattered far more than popularity. The respect flowed both ways. Mortensen often spoke about Christopher Lee with enormous admiration. He wasn't impressed simply because Lee was famous. He admired Lee's intelligence, discipline, and quiet confidence. Lee never needed to remind people of everything he had accomplished. His knowledge spoke for itself. Whether the conversation was about military history, mythology, literature, languages, or filmmaking, Lee always seemed to have something thoughtful to contribute. Mortensen listened carefully because he understood he was spending time with someone whose life experiences stretched far beyond the movie business. Despite the nearly 40-year age difference between them, they met as equals. They shared the same respect for preparation, the same love of history, and the same belief that every detail mattered. Their friendship was built on curiosity, discipline, and a genuine appreciation for each other's talents rather than celebrity status. As filming continued, that friendship would lead to one unforgettable moment that Mortensen never forgot, a moment that confirmed everything people had long suspected about Christopher Lee's extraordinary past. Then came the scene that left the entire set listening to Christopher Lee in complete silence, the moment that confirmed every rumor. Among all the stories that came out of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, one has been repeated more than almost any other. It involved Christopher Lee, Peter Jackson, and a single moment during the filming of Saruman's death scene. For many people on set, it was unforgettable. For Viggo Mortensen, it became one of the clearest examples of why Christopher Lee was unlike anyone else he had ever worked with. The scene itself seemed straightforward. Saruman was to be stabbed from behind before falling to his death. Like every major scene in the trilogy, Peter Jackson carefully explained how he wanted it performed. He described the movement, the timing, and the emotional reaction. At one point, Jackson suggested that Saruman should let out a loud scream after being stabbed. It sounded like a normal piece of direction. Most actors would have nodded, filmed the scene as requested, and moved on. Christopher Lee did something different. He didn't challenge Jackson in an angry or disrespectful way. Instead, he calmly explained that the reaction wasn't accurate. His voice remained steady as he spoke, and everyone nearby stopped to listen. Lee told Jackson that when someone is stabbed in the back, especially in a way that causes serious damage, they do not usually let out the kind of dramatic scream often heard in movies. According to Lee, the body reacts very differently. The air is forced out almost immediately, leaving little opportunity for a loud cry. Instead, the sound is much shorter, quieter, and closer to a sudden breath escaping than a full scream. Lee wasn't speaking as someone who had simply watched war films or read medical books. He spoke as someone who had heard it himself. He quietly explained that he knew exactly what that sound was because he had experienced it during wartime. The set became silent. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody laughed. Nobody questioned what he had just said. The people standing nearby understood they were hearing something that came from real life, not from acting classes or movie research. Peter Jackson later recalled the moment with enormous respect. Rather than insisting on his original vision, he immediately accepted Lee's explanation. Jackson understood that Christopher Lee possessed knowledge no director could learn from filmmaking alone. Without argument, Jackson changed the scene. Lee then performed Saruman's death exactly as he believed it should happen. The result was restrained, believable, and very different from the dramatic reactions audiences had become used to seeing in many films. That brief exchange lasted only a few moments, but it stayed with those who witnessed it for years afterward. For Viggo Mortensen, the moment carried even greater meaning. By that stage of filming, Mortensen had already spent many hours talking with Lee. He knew about Lee's military service during World War II. He knew about the stories linking him to intelligence work and special operations. He also knew that Lee rarely discussed those years in detail. Whenever people asked too many questions, Lee usually gave only short answers before changing the subject. Mortensen had never felt that Lee exaggerated his past. In fact, the opposite was true. Lee almost always avoided talking about his wartime experiences unless there was a genuine reason to mention them. He never seemed interested in making himself sound heroic or mysterious. That made moments like the Saruman scene even more powerful. When Lee corrected Jackson's direction, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't telling a dramatic war story for attention. He was simply making sure the scene reflected reality as accurately as possible. That quiet confidence left a deep impression on Mortensen. Years later, Mortensen spoke about Christopher Lee with enormous respect, often returning to this story when describing what made Lee different from almost everyone else in the film industry. Mortensen explained that Lee brought something to The Lord of the Rings that could never be taught in acting school. He carried genuine life experience into every performance. For an actor like Mortensen, who believed deeply in authenticity, that mattered. Throughout his career, Mortensen had worked hard to make every role feel real. He trained with real swords, formed genuine relationships with horses, and pushed himself physically because he believed audiences could recognize honesty on screen. Then he met Christopher Lee. Lee didn't need to search for authenticity in certain moments because some of it came from experiences he had already lived. His understanding of war, danger, discipline, and human behavior had been shaped decades before cameras ever rolled in New Zealand. Mortensen later described Lee as someone who never spoke from theory. He spoke from memory. There was a huge difference between the two, and Mortensen recognized it immediately. That is why the famous story of Saruman's death has lasted for so many years. It wasn't simply about correcting a scene. It revealed something much bigger about Christopher Lee himself. It showed why so many rumors surrounded his wartime past and why those who knew him believed there was far more to his life than he ever chose to reveal publicly. For Mortensen, there was no longer any doubt. He didn't need Christopher Lee to tell every story from the war. One calm explanation during a film shoot was enough to convince him that the extraordinary reputation Lee had carried for decades was built on real experiences, not Hollywood legend. Even years after Lee's passing in 2015, Mortensen still speaks about him with the same admiration. That says a great deal about the impact Lee had. Hollywood is full of famous partnerships that fade with time, but Mortensen's appreciation for Christopher Lee has only grown stronger. To him, Lee was not simply a legendary actor who happened to play Saruman. He was someone who quietly demonstrated that the strongest performances come from honesty, humility, and a lifetime of learning. And the choices Mortensen made after leaving Middle-earth showed just how deeply